Hey guys, today's episode is gonna knock your socks off. You're about to hear an incredible conversation that Gladiator and I had with Marc Dibernardo. Marc is a command sergeant major in the United States Army, and he's got some incredible stories to share with you about God, his life, his marriage. Marc is an incredible man of God and a true warrior, and also holds a couple of Guinness World Records that I'll let him tell you about. But join us now as we dive in to this conversation with Marc.
Like battalion commanders and sergeants majors all sitting in this class, and I was like, no, we're all born evil. And it just got so heated, and I was like, they explained, they're like, oh, hey, explain why. And I said, well, okay, let's think of a baby, right? Like a baby, a child, they hide things, they hit,
steal,
they do these things. And so one of these, officers, very educated, said to me, oh, that's the straw man theory. And I was like, first off, that's not the straw man theory. And he's like, well, how do you know? You didn't even read a book. I said, first off, I take Christian apologetics, and I promise you that's not the straw man theory. And they're like, well, then why do you believe this way? I said, because I'm a Christian. I believe, this is what I believe. And you had a couple people in the room like, well, I'm Christian too, and I've never heard all people are evil. And I said, okay. So then another...
Romans 3:23.
Right. So, also even in Genesis 8 where God says, hey, like people are evil from their youth. And so we have this conversation, and it is getting heated. Like you have angry human beings in there, and this one sergeant major comes to me and yells at me and it's like, so wait, you're telling me when you see soldiers you see evil? And I was like, well, let me explain. No, do you see? I said, let me answer the question. Right? I said, do I see evil? 100%. I said, I see evil. I also see evil when I look in the mirror. I said, however, it is through, and I was like, you know what? I'm already at this part. Like, this is where I'm at. I was like, it's through the blood of Jesus Christ that covers people, that makes you good. And I said, that is why I am good, because of Jesus, and that is the only reason I will ever be good. And it was like, and people were like, oh, I'm a Christian. That's not what, and I'm like, that's a story for another day. Like, that's not right now. Yeah. And there was an officer in the room, and he was just laughing at me. And I said, you know what? If you have a problem, like, let's discuss this like men, but don't sit here and like laugh and mock. I said, because that doesn't solve the problems that we have in this world. And people are like, that's just sad that you look at soldiers as evil. And I'm like, why is that sad? Like,
human,
they need Jesus just as much as I do. And my instructor, he really commended me for that. But then after the course was over, he kind of counsels each individual person, and he's like, I'm a Christian, and I've never heard anyone like or seen anyone do that. And I was like, listen, like Dr. B, like you got to stand firm in your faith, man. And he's like, I know. He's like, it's just so hard. And it was really cool because like here I am now talking to the teacher, just being like, hey, encouraging him to be strong in his faith. And, it was just for a very brief second while I was in that classroom, I felt alone. And then I was going to get up and walk away. And it was because I texted my wife and I was like, what do I do? And she's just like, God put you there. He's going to get you through it. Like, my wife is such an encourager. And I was like, no, I'm going to stay. And then the next day, it was really cool to see a lot of people be like, I've never seen anyone stand up for a faith like that. Like, and do it in a way you did. You didn't like do it out of anger. You like did it out of compassion and love. Like, that's crazy. And I was like, trust me, it's been a long road.
Wow.
So I'm sorry. Like,
no, like that was incredible.
But this literally was the past, it was past like 2 weeks ago.
I guarantee you impacted men in that room that you'll never know about.
I hope so.
In ways you'll never know about, right? Because they are probably on the fence.
Yeah.
They're not 100% sure what Christianity even teaches.
Yeah.
But they saw in you a picture of what they could be like.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that, because, what really bothers me is that in today's culture, to be a man and to be a Christian, we kind of like have this paradigm that we assume that it's like you got to be but you can be a Christian man and also have compassion and love. 1 Peter 3:15, right? Like when I'm giving a defense for my faith, I'm doing it with gentleness and kindness, right? Like,
right.
And men don't understand, like there are these levels that, there's a time, just like Ecclesiastes, right? There's a time for everything. And I think sometimes, like as men, we forget in the Bible, we always look for that like one piece of scripture that just says it all. And I look at it as kind of like the commander's intent. You being in the Air Force, right? Like been in the Air Force, we cannot do anything without a commander's intent. And I look at it as, what is God's intent? And that's why for me, like 2 Kings 5 is a very big piece of my life of like Naaman. You have this guy who is legitimately like beyond special forces. And he's going to like got a skin disease, and they're like, hey, go to this guy Elisha, and he'll cure you. And he goes, and Elisha's like, yeah, just go ahead and wash right there. Doesn't even come to the door, right? And this guy is so upset. But it's cool to see the transformation that he has, and how God doesn't remove him from his situation. That's the piece, is that like as men, we want to remove ourselves from the situation, and yet God keeps us in the situation so we can continue to share who he is. Because at the end of that piece in 2 Kings chapter 5, you see Naaman is like, hey, listen, please forgive me when my king bows down to this false idol and I have to bow down. Like that is not who I worship. That is not what I'm worshiping. And Elijah's like, go, you're good. And it's a breath of fresh air, because I kind of parallel that to when the soldiers and the tax collectors came to the apostle John the Baptist. They came to the John the Baptist in Luke, and they said, what should we do? And he talks about tax collectors being, don't take too much, and then the soldiers don't basically use your position to take from people. But he never told them, stop being a tax collector, stop being a soldier, like stop being these things. And as men, like we have to just remember that, like where we are, this is where God has placed us. And we when we became followers of Christ, like yes, we are changed, but it doesn't change like where our mission field is at. We're not all meant to be a Ferrari with all these things. Like we're all different models of cars and makes, and we have these destinations we got to go. I'm so sorry.
That's so good. I love the car analogy. That's fantastic.
He brought up, man, men needing something, right? Not knowing these apologetics. Man, if there was an organization that did that brought that
train
to men.
Yeah.
Thanks for the plug.
Listen, Rick, and I love you. I know you've been like every time, like you're always like Men's Alliance. And I appreciate you. And so like here I am like around Men's Alliance, and you're like, you've got me. But I do think it's great. Like I think it's good no matter what. But I do believe like Christian apologetics, like it was really great to hear Chris when we were going through Greg Kokel's book Tactics, how he was just like, yeah, man. And like, have you read this book? And I was like, yeah, man, like Frank Turk's the man. I'm from New York. Frank Turk's from Jersey. Like, like it's such a great, like, and there's J. Warner Wallace, believe it or not, who kind of drew me into apologetics because I'm like, this guy's a cop, right? Like, and I know as men, sometimes it's hard because we look at other men and we're like, what's your background? Because we want to find that relatable pattern. And, that's why I think it's very good, though, that you have Frank Turek, who used to be in the Navy. You have J. Warner Wallace, who's LAPD detective. You have Sean McDowell, who, well, I mean, we all know who his dad is. So, like, it's just you have these good Christian apologists who are really trying to equip men and women in today's culture to be better Christians in the defending of their faith and defending it in such a way. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever watched Sean McDowell have like that guy can have a conversation with some of the most darkest spots on this world, and he does it. And I'm like, how did you do that?
Incredible.
Like, how are you able to navigate that? But he does it because he has that love and that passion.
Yeah. I think, like the stand you took, story, a lot of men want to take that stand, and they might feel as strongly and as passionately, but the thing that keeps them from taking the stand is they are afraid of looking foolish if they get hit with a question or a statement that they do not know how to reply to. So, and this was me for years too, right? Like I would be like, I don't want to look like an idiot right now because I know what I would say if I were them.
Yeah.
Right. Like I know what they're going to hit me with, and I don't really know how to respond to that. And so I think that the training that we offer, what it does is having that little bit of training, it emboldens men. And you think about this from a military standpoint, it doesn't take a ton of training to give guys enough confidence to jump.
Yeah.
Right? You give them enough training to know that you're going to be okay. Here's what you need. Now go jump.
All right, now you're saying, when you say jump, we're talking about out of an aircraft, right?
I'm talking about out
So
of an
let me just be
aircraft.
very, very transparent with you. Every time I jump out of an aircraft, I am not ashamed to say it. I am scared. Every time that paratroop door opens up, like the loadmaster opens it up, and I'm like, can we land this thing? Like, but it's good because it's a fear that allows you to focus.
Yeah.
But you trust in your training. And in the Army, the way we train is through reps, through sets, through stress, and through complexity. And I think that is one of those things that as a Christian, within any organization of trying to train and equip individuals to defend that faith, like you have to accept those things. Like you're going to have repetition, you're going to have sets, you're going to have stress, and you're going to have complexity. And let me kind of preface what we just talked about, but that didn't start like that. That's like here when the reason I started Christian apologetics was because I, just like what you said, I was scared and I proverbial got punched in the face by an atheist. And I was like, and I was a new Christian and I'm like, what do I do? And the church that we were attending had an apologetics course, and the guy who teaches it he would do street evangelism. And he would run us through these courses. And I was like, man, okay, I need to do this. And the hardest step was the first one, admitting, like, as a man, like, here I am, like a 30, like, something year old man being like, I don't know how to talk to people. And like, and it was cool because then I go in this classroom and I'm looking around. I'm like, how old are you? They're like, oh, I'm 45. How old are you? Oh, I'm 52. How old are you? I'm 65. And I'm like, this is great. Like
they're all wishing they had taken that class when they were in their 30s.
And seeing them bring their children, they're really kind of encouraged me. And so that's kind of where my addiction started, because each conversation I've had has grown. Like this conversation I just told you about, like that's the largest I've had, like deep. And it was, but it's really cool because my son, my 12-year-old son, just had a conversation like 3-4 days ago with his friend. Like they're literally outside throwing the football around, and he asked his friend, he was just like, hey, what do you believe in? And his friend's like, well, we believe in Satanism. And he's like, really? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, how did you come? Like, he starts doing these things. And it was crazy because he comes and he talks to my wife and he tells her, and he's like, there were some things I didn't know and this and that. And my wife started talking to him about apologetics, and he's just like, Dad, I feel like this burden is on me. Like I have to, like, I don't want to embarrass Jesus. And I'm like, son,
Wow.
come into the fold.
What a heart.
So it's just, I think at any age, I think men, like the first step is really just admitting like, hey, like I need to be better at this. And if you're a man, like listening, and you're saying that I don't need this, like I just encourage you to kind of like do your self-assessment of emotional intelligence and say, hey, like, am I really there? Because I don't think we ever really truly arrive, but we have that desire to master, what it is that we're called to do. And that's that race that Paul is saying, like, it's an endurance thing. Like we're not there yet until we're glorified. Our bodies are up in heaven, but ultimately, like, I think what Men's Alliance does, just, through Rick, through Chris, hearing them talk about it, I was like, this is really encouraging that you have something out there where men can come to, especially, and again, I know you guys are not like group specific, but people who've been law enforcement, military, firefighter, paramedic, first responder, whatever you want to call it, like you're used to that group, that tight-knit piece. And so like when you exit, you're like, wait a second. And it's hard to look, because we want to go to the church and feel that. But there's just sometimes you're like, okay, well, that guy's like a Fortune 500, like CEO, and this person's, a banker or whatever. And I'm like, I'm just a soldier, right? Like, what do I do? And so, I'm gonna be honest, the church where we're at, it's cool because I knew Rick, and that kind of drew me in. And then you have Chris, and there's Paul, who's a like you have all these people who we have that similar thing because we're used to that bond, that tribe like mentality, and the way we've always built all of our tribes, no matter Air Force, Army, Navy, whatever. It's through like stress, through hard times.
Shared struggle.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
So, I mean, I know you founded this whole Men's Alliance thing on like, hey, this is what I was missing. Like, and this is what we need. And, you are getting it where others are not, and they don't want to accept it.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, like, kudos
Thanks,
to you.
man. I appreciate that. I have huge, just enormous amounts of respect for people that do street evangelism. Like, I love watching videos of guys like on Venice Beach and Ray Comfort.
Oh, yeah.
I love watching
Oh, yeah.
him, and he's like a ninja master at just talking to people. And that's just totally not me. Like, the thought of it is just like, I would rather get up on stage and try to play an instrument that I've never played in my life than just walk up to a stranger. But while I love that, I feel like a lot of Christians have this like Christian guilt, like thinking if you don't do it this way, if you don't do this, if you don't walk up to strangers on the sidewalk and ask them, if you died tonight, do you know where you would be? If you don't do that, then you're not a good Christian.
Oh, man.
And so, like, I would say, like, the lean, the kind of the bend of all of the apologetics training that we do in our Carry the Fire course, it's all bent towards the kitchen table, or riding in your family car with your kids, and being able to like bring up questions at the dinner table, answer your friends, your kids' friends' questions while you're driving in the car, because I've been in that situation. And I feel like if we can get to realize, hey, look, you don't have to go be a Sean McDowell or a Ray Comfort, but you do need to be able to have these conversations in your home.
Absolutely.
You got to train your family in the living room. That's your mission field. That's where you've got to do it. I think there's a light bulb moment, at least there was for me, where you realize, okay, I can do that. That's in my wheelhouse. I might not be this guy, but we all better be this guy. And I think guys have this all or nothing mentality. And they're like, if I can't go be on the corner of Venice Beach preaching, then it's not for me. But it's like, hey, there's like a million notches on that dial between where you are and that. So you don't have to be a 10, but man, there's 4, 5, 6, right? So we can give guys training just to be a better spiritual leader at your dining room table.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that men need to get. They need to understand that.
Well, and I'm glad you say that, because you're talking about it starts at the dinner table, because I truly believe in Deuteronomy 6, it's the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These words I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hands and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts and on your city gates. Meaning, sign on your hands, your actions, on your forehead, your thoughts. But you're doing this constantly with your kids, your family, as you walk along the road. Like, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And what's really hard for us as parents sometimes, I can speak for myself, is, becoming a Christian at the age of 30, I've had a chance to really experience sin, which was not good. And Rick,
I was there for
Rick was there for some of that. But, it's really letting your guard down and being transparent with your kids. And kind of saying like, so I believe in this thing. It's called, it's not a belief, but there's a system. It's called the Johari window. And the Johari window, there's this one pane. It's called the arena. And the larger you make your arena, meaning you make things known out to the world, the smaller you make your blind spots and the smaller you make your unknowns. However, when you do that, it can sometimes be weaponized against you, where kids can say, or other humans can say, well, you did this, so it was okay, and here you are. And so it's really sitting down at that table being like, when my son is, we'll talk about alcohol, right? Like, and I'll tell him, like, because he'll ask me, he knows that I used to be an alcoholic and, why I stopped drinking, and I tell him why, I tell him stories, and he's just like, wow, like, that's crazy. And so it's like, it's starting there, but then moving on, because every single every man has a story. Every dude has a story, regardless of whether they were a Christian at 5, from whatever. Like, every dude has a story. And that's kind of like the beginning point of apologetics, because, we always think that we got to be, like you said, Sean McDowell, Greg Kokel, like you name all these really good apologists where they're good with their words. But for me, it's always been kind of like just being honest with who I am. I mean, I'll never forget being at a military ball. And I was a first sergeant at the time, and my brigade sergeant major came up to me, and he's like, "First sergeant, when are you gonna start drinking some adult beverages?" And I'm like, "'Cause I'm drinking water." And I was like, I don't drink." And he looked at me. I was like, "Yeah, I used to be an alcoholic." And it was like he stopped, like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, "No," like, and I told him, I was like, I used to be an alcoholic, this and that. I changed my life. But it was good because it opened that door for a conversation. It also opens the door for a conversation with people who are Christians, who are like, well, the Bible doesn't say, and I'm like, hold on, like, let's have this conversation. I just choose not to drink because I know where it led me in my life. But again, a Christian apologetics is not just for non-believers, it's for other Christians as well, to have that discussion. So, but I really think you hit the nail on the head, man. Like, it starts in the home, like at the dinner table, in the car. Like, that's where it begins, and your kids will see that, and I promise you they will become just like you.
And I love that you're first of all, that's a level of real, right, that we love in Men's Alliance. That's part of our motto, is real. And it shocks people, like when you said, no thanks, I used to be an alcoholic. People get hit with real, and from what I've seen is people either are immediately drawn towards real. They're like, this dude's authentic, I want to hang out with him more. Or they're just like so freaked out by real that they don't know how to process it. I've seen guys come to Men's Alliance, like a first time guy, and somebody will share something around the fire. They're like, my wife took the kids and left. And they're looking around, and I'm looking at the first time guy, and they're looking around like, is this sort of conversation normal? They're like, well, what the heck? These guys are being, you don't talk about that. Just talk about golf. Talk about the game. Right. And some guys like never come back because it was like they are not ready in their life for that level of real. But, if you've ever experienced being authentic and being around real, you can never go back. Like, if you're ever in a group where everybody's just talking about the weather and pretending they're fine, it's just disgusting. I'm like, I don't have time for this. This is a waste of everybody's time. So there's this other thing going on here in this discussion about, like, you talked about, you have to become vulnerable, and then that can be used against you. And you've got to become humble enough to say, I need training. And I think men, especially American men, everybody wants to pretend that they want to stay in their comfort zone, first of all, right? Like, I only want to play the sport that I know I can win. They've got that mentality. And like, I had an uncle, and he only ever wanted to play golf with me. And I would like, well, let's go play racquetball. And he'd be like, nah, let's play golf, right? Because he didn't want to play anything he was not going to win. And men are like that with spiritual training, apologetics. They're also like that with anything about combatives, right?
Oh yeah.
Because as long as I don't get on the mat with you, I can pretend in my mind like I'm good.
Oh no! So let me. He has tried multiple times to get me. I'm like, hey, man, I'm good. Like, and it's not that I'm like, oh, I can beat it. It's like, I'm good. I'm old, and Rick can really crush me. So I'm like, no, I'm good.
I go. And guys do this all the time with shooting too, right? Like, as long as I don't get on the range with you, I can pretend in my mind, my fantasy that I'm still decent is there, as long as I don't get on the mat. And then the same thing is true with apologetics training. As long as I don't get into this, I can pretend I don't need that. That's just for people who like to argue. That's for people who are, I've heard Vodi Balkum said people think that apologetics is just for a special subset of Christians. They're like, oh no, I'm not into apologetics. That's just for like the special forces Christians. And he's like, no. He was like, if you're a Christian, you are an apologist.
For sure.
It's like you're told you are.
Yeah.
And the question is, are you just going to be a good one or a bad one? But I think we need to normalize apologetics training in churches, and everybody needs to realize this is not about arguing. This is about being able to explain the reasons, right? A reasonable faith. It's about being able to explain, why are you a Christian?
So, and I agree with you. So this Bible right here is an apologetics Bible because that's what it does. And it gives you the ability to kind of see things from different perspectives. But, when you said to kind of normalize it, I challenge someone out there to prove that we don't use apologetics every day in our everyday life because we do it. I mean, think about it. Think about sports. Like, we will literally argue tooth and nail. I mean, I'm a New York Yankees fan. Yankees lost. But, we'll argue our position for anything, right? Like, we will argue a defense for, why we're doing something. Like, why did you pick this? Well, because of this. Or why do you do that? Because, like, we use apologetics every day, all day, and we don't even realize it. It's just the moment.
That's a great point.
Because and I know you know this, but the apologio, right? Like, to give a defense. Like, we do this in every way possible. When we make a statement of something and someone disagrees with it, we always make a defense. Like, we could be in the boardroom, or we could be, with our coworkers or wherever. We're always giving a defense of, hey, I'm going to go ahead and frame this wall. Well, no, this is what you do. Well, no, this is what you should do. You're giving a defense. Like, there's levels of it, but I'm just saying you're still giving a defense. And so I don't think we realize that we have that capacity within us. Like, it's a gift that all of us have because we're always defending something. It's just when you put Christian on top of that, then we kind of get really kind of like, oh, wait a second. Like, I'm not like this. When ultimately it's like, no, man, you know, trust me, you know this. And then that's why it's like, if you don't know, just say, hey, that's a really good question. I don't know that right now. I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
That's where the humility piece comes into play that you just said. C.S. Lewis said it best. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking about yourself less. And once we can kind of get to that point, we'll realize, like, wait, this is within all of us. Rick and I, we've had conversations where he's like, no, I disagree with you. That's fine. We're still doing apologetics. May not be on Christian. It may be on something else. So, like, I digress. Sorry.
So on the humility thing, I'm gonna humble myself right now. I think it was matter of fact, it was about 3 months before I started Men's Alliance. Mark, we were talking, and he was like, hey, why don't we get into, it was C.S. Lewis, Screw Tape Letters, right?
Favorite book, yeah.
Yeah. So he wanted to, like, do a little study together, me and him on it. And I'm going to come clean right now. I was not ready. I was not there. And I used every excuse. Oh, man, I'm just started this new job. We'll find time. We'll find time. And we never got to it. And it's because I didn't think I was on your level enough. And I didn't want to show my weakness in my faith. Now, had it been after I've been through all this training that Men's Alliance has given me, man, I look at it now like, man, I missed that opportunity to train with them. Like, had I just humbled myself, think of where I would be after we went through that together.
But how do you know, though, that, like, and I got, like, you're saying, like, you had to humble yourself, but how do you know that wasn't even planned by God? Like, God wasn't saying, like, hey, no, I need you to do this Men's Alliance first before you go ahead, and because God gives us, like, the Holy Spirit gives us confidence. Like, we can talk Holy Spirit all day long, and we can always say, the term Holy Spirit, this, but when you see it, when you, like, kind of, like, put it on the table, you're like, I don't feel like I was filled at that time. Like, we have the Holy Spirit living in us, but I was not Spirit filled. You go through Men's Alliance, all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, like, and the Spirit's like, yeah, you know that guy I rose from the grave, his name's Jesus? Yeah, guess what? I live in you. And you're like, wait a second, I can do this. Like, and you become, it's not that Men's Alliance is training you to be like this super warrior. All it's doing is showing you like what's already inside of you. It's kind of like pulling the curtain back, taking a wire brush on some metal, getting the rust off, but that's really what it is. And I think that's great. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, I wouldn't hold that burden all on yourself, because I think, again, sometimes as men, you know, Galatians is really clear about carrying each other's burdens together, but it also talks about load. And so, like, we have to carry our own load. And for us being in the military, we know like the basic combat load. We have a body armor, we got ammunition, and we got a weapon. Like that is our basic load. God is not saying carry your load, he's saying carry your burdens, one another's burdens. So like you still have to carry that load through that piece. And God is like, hey, here's what's on your load. Here's what you can use. And you're equipped, man. Now you're equipped to where you have the ability to be like, okay, I see now. I want more, because it can be kind of addicting where you're like, I want to be a part of this more. Like, I want more people to know about this. I want more people to be educated on this, because I have that compassion of, I want other men to feel what I'm feeling right now. It's this great thing. So
You talked about getting punched in the face by an atheist, figuratively.
Yes,
I'm imagining.
Yes.
And I think that's a huge part of any learning process.
Yeah.
Is there's got to be the moment where you realize you have a big need. There's a big gap between where you are and where you want to be. And sometimes we don't know that. We don't realize how big that gap is till we're confronted, you know, with somebody that's on a different level. I think I've shared this before, maybe on a podcast, but the first time I ever went to a judo class ever, and I knew nothing about judo. This was way before jiu-jitsu was in every strip mall. And I went to a judo class, and I was just like, you know, I'm just kind of here to check this out. I'm kind of just here to see what this is all about. And the instructor said, that's awesome. You know, he said, one of the things that I love about judo, different from other martial arts that are out there, is he said, I can choke you out with your own arm. And I remember the first time I ever heard that, and I just remember thinking, like, I can't even wrap my brain around that. How is that even a possibility? And then about 45 minutes later, we're rolling near the end of that night, and that guy, that instructor, he choked me out with my own arm. And I remember,
how is this possible?
As soon as I got up, I was hooked. From that moment. I was like, I have to learn how to do this. This is incredible, right? But it took that, and then so that's what made me want to get into it. Was because I saw the gap. Oh man, here's where you are, and here's where this guy is. You know, and I might not get to there, but I want to get at least higher on it. And then I had a similar moment in a conversation about Christianity, right? When a guy asked me why was I a Christian, and you know, I gave some answers, really just off the top of my head, because I'd never thought about this. But really what he did was he got me thinking, you know, and a lot of times people start telling the story of how they became a Christian. You know, well, it was this one time I was at this thing, and, you know, I felt the Holy Spirit. And then he was like, okay, that's your story of how you became a Christian. But what I'm asking you is, why today are you a follower of Christ? And so that was like my moment of getting choked out with my own arm in Christianity. And what I've seen over the past couple of years since that moment is a lot of Christians, a lot of really good professional Christians in the church, they will use the phrase like, oh, it's just faith. You just have to have faith. And I think they use that as their, I don't want to do the work. I don't want to study. I don't want to get choked out with my own arm. I don't want to read all these books. So I've got this like hall pass. I've got this like get out of jail free card that I just play when I'm asked tough questions. I'm like, oh, you just have to have faith. And I love Frank Turk's line. I steal this all the time. Is God doesn't give you brownie points for being dumb, right? Like you don't get extra Christian points for remaining ignorant and being like, I don't want to learn anything. It's just faith. It's like loving the Lord your God with all your mind. What does that look like? How do you love the Lord your God with all your mind? If you're not studying and reading and learning and occasionally getting choked out with your own arm,
Absolutely.
You're not fully loving God with everything you've got. So I think that's a big piece of it for me is we're trying to combat this mentality of you just have to have faith. First of all, that's not the message in the New Testament, right? In fact, that's why Jesus did miracles. He gave people evidence. He didn't just come here and say, y'all just have to all just believe in me. Just trust me. Just have faith. It was like he gave people evidence after evidence after evidence. He showed them the holes in his hands, right? He knew he created us. He knew we have doubts, and he knew we have to have evidence for things. And so that's why he went around doing miracles, was to give evidence. And so I think that's important for us to understand is God knows you have doubts. He's okay with that. And he's got good answers, right? He doesn't want you to just remain in the dark. He wants you to learn the answers so that you can share with others.
You just said have doubts.
Yeah.
Ooh, you might be stepping on some people's toes when you're listening to this, right? Like the moment you say Christianity and you say doubt, and I challenge people to remember where the man came to Jesus and he said, I believe, but help me in my unbelief. There's Ephesians is very clear. Faith is not your own. It is given by God. So yeah, you're right. Like the doubting piece, like it is okay. That's where Jacob wrestles with God. Like there's so many things that we can say, but it's that forward progression, right? You're making forward progression on the field. But with the apologetics, like, man, you said it perfect where you're like, hey, sometimes, because you didn't just say that one time is when you got choked out by your own arm. Sometimes you have to deal with that. And it's kind of like how we respond to that, not react, but respond. Because defending your faith, I mean, I guess my question to you is, how many times have you had someone look at you and say, well, you don't look like a Christian? Like when you say, hey, I'm a Christian, and you're like, well, the people look at you and you're like, you don't look like a Christian, right? You got tattoos. Oh, you were in the military? Like did you kill anybody, right? Like, or, you listen to this kind of music or you do this, like you're still giving a defense. You're not fitting
their
that
mold.
Box, right? Like we take it in a box, and we do the same thing with Christian apologetics. We try to put it in a box, and it's like, no, man, like you have these conversations all day, every day, but you just have to step out, and it's just like walking. You have to just take the first step. And for the men who don't want to, let me back up. So there is a Christian YouTuber who I really enjoy watching. I like Christian hip hop, right? I love Christian hip hop. And there is a guy, he is an Armenian. So I'm half Italian, half Armenian. And, Armenians were kind of like few and far between. And he has this YouTube channel, and he talks about a lot of the, kind of what's current culture, but and it's all about Christianity. Like, is this right? Is this, where is this? And he always brings it back to the Bible. And it's really cool because he has gone on several podcasts for pornography, like with porn stars, and literally done apologetics with them. And like, here's this guy who
That's awesome.
is literally just like, okay, like I'm talking about sitting at the table. Like, I'll never forget the first time I watched the first one he did. And like, he's like talking about Jesus. And like, there's someone, one of the females is like, well, I believe in Jesus. And he just starts like having that conversation with her. And you could tell it was getting her upset because she knew what she was doing was wrong. And so it's like, seeing him do this and then going into other areas of culture. And I'm like, that is what we as Christians do, right? Like we go to these dark places. We try to stay within the little C, right? The church building, our little local church. And we forget that, listen, like where we are at, being in the military is it's not sunshine, rainbows, and purple unicorns. Like, it is not this whole like, oh, everybody's great, everybody. No, we suffer with post-traumatic stress disorder. We suffer with suicides. We suffer with sexual assaults. We suffer with equal opportunity issues. We suffer with we deal with so much stuff, alcoholism, like pride, all of these things. And I'm sure someone out there is probably gonna be like, oh, but it's true. Like, we have to be honest with ourselves and say, hey, this is the space that we work in. Because when Rick worked at at Barfoot, he worked at the ranges and everything. The people who he met were not all Christians. And so it's like he's having to just, not even with his verbal cues, Christian apologetics is also with your nonverbal cues. And that's another piece as Christians. Like, if our audio does not match our video, people will see that very quick and they will go ahead and exploit that. I mean, it's literally what the enemy, our physical enemies, right, who we have fought against in the war on terror, they see an opening and they exploit the opening. Well, guess what? The enemy that is not flesh and blood, he sees an opening and he's just going to exploit that opening. And we as men just have to remember, like, when we do apologetics, when we give defense, hey, you can have a lot of this, but if you don't have this and you're not living it out, like, that's a scary world that you're going to start creating.
Yeah. I love how you said that apologetics makes you better in your job too. Like, you just use it in everything. One of my buddies, I got him to read Tactics years ago, and he's an attorney down in North Carolina, and he told me, he said, that book Tactics made me a better lawyer than law school did. He was like, I use these tactics all the time in depositions, and it just changes everything, right? Like, how did you come to that conclusion? He's like, I just ask other attorneys that when they make a statement, and most often they made a statement without any supporting evidence. And I want to put in a great plug here. We have Greg Kokel coming to the Men's Alliance National Rally.
Whoa.
May 2nd through 4th.
Oh, yeah.
In right here, Pocahontas State Park. We've rented it out. So we're trying to get tribesmen from all over the country to come here May 2nd through 4th for the first ever MA National Rally. So, guys, if you're listening to this wherever you are, rent a van if you need to, bring your tribe, and road trip to the rally.
Trip to the rally.
Man, Greg Kokel, like, that's for people who don't know, like, Greg Kokel is, man, he is, I mean, I don't even know, like, kind of the words to put in place. He is human, yes, right? Like, but I mean, he's just very in that expertise in that craft. He is definitely one of the top experts. And for you guys to get that, that's really cool, because he's not some, he's not
really, a small fish.
Yeah, and but he's also like he's down to earth. He's normal. So
like
really cool.
You were mentioning earlier, like all those famous apologists that have backgrounds in law enforcement or military. Greg Kokel's background is a surfer. He's just like the most of all the apologists out there. He's the most chill one. He's the one that
for sure that
walks up on stage with his hands in his pockets and goes, "I don't have any slides." And instantly I'm like, I already like this guy. I can relate to him. He's very approachable. So yeah, really excited. I can't wait to, just have some conversations with him as well as hearing him. But I wanted to plug that real quick. All right. Welcome to the Men's Alliance podcast.
Good cold open.
Man, this has been so cool. So I want to just hear a little bit of your personal story. How did you come to Christ? Give us a little bit of who you are and who you were, and how Christ found you. Amen. Has money gotten in the way of how God can use you? Let me tell you about Tom Love, certified financial planner with the Main Street Group. Tom Love from Tuckahoe Tribe, aka Doc, can absolutely get you squared away with your finances. My wife and I use Doc to handle our personal finances, and his team is second to none. Tom is a certified financial planner. He's a Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro. He's been ranked top 40 under 40. He's been ranked number 2 in Richmond Times-Dispatch. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal. And make sure you mention Men's Alliance whenever you reach out to Doc. He gives Men's Alliance Tip of the Spear Ministries a portion of the proceeds when you invest through him. He's a fee-only fiduciary, which means he doesn't make money unless you make money. So check out Tom Love at the Main Street Group.
So, my name is Mark, and I was born in right outside of Chicago to a family who father was Italian, a mother who's Armenian. So just like when you think of Christianity, you think of like Armenians feel, First Church, Italians, Catholic. So it's like this whole struggle in faith. And, I came from a home that was not healthy, right? My mother was diagnosed with bipolar and manic depression. So she would have episodes. She'd be in and out of the psychiatric hospital. And my dad, he worked for a company where he was just traveling all the time. So it was really like me and my sister. Kind of growing up, I just remember, my parents always fighting, like angry. My parents divorced when I was young, really young. And I kind of didn't want to leave my sister. So when they were just like, hey, where do you want to go? I was like, I want to go with my sister. And so like she was like my safety net. And when I finished elementary school, we had to move because my dad's company moved him to Connecticut. And I lived in outside of Hartford, Connecticut for about 2 years. And that was just super rough. But that's kind of where I learned real quick in life that, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. And sometimes you gotta stand up. You be the first one to stand at the line before someone else. And so I got into, I was a big fighter. I was a big brawler. Like I was the guy who would talk a lot of trash, get his butt whooped. I'm not even gonna lie. Like I wasn't that guy who went around beating people up. I was the guy who was always getting beat up because I'd always get jumped. I'd see like a group of 12 guys and I'd start talking trash to them, and then they just pound on me. I remember getting hit with a baseball bat one time. I came out with the bat. The bat came out of my hand. I was like, wow, man. Like my dad was just like, wow, like son, like you gotta calm down. And I'm like, okay. Well, then we moved again, and this time I moved to New York, and New York is a place where you got to learn how to survive sometimes. And so we moved to New York. My sister kind of went to college, and I was on my own. I was really on my own. I was really big into, just doing my own thing. I worked because, when we were in Connecticut, my first job was working on a tobacco farm because I wanted to make money. And once I started getting paid, I was like, dude, this is good. Like money is good. And I just didn't stop after that. So I was always working since the age of 13 because I just always wanted to work and make money. And so when we moved to New York, I would always find jobs. I got in with the wrong crowd. We definitely got in with the wrong crowd of, really drinking, just kind of treating women disrespectfully, like just not treating women the way God designed men to treat women. And like it was bad. Like I was literally living on my own. And I always tell everybody, Matt Chandler, I love Matt Chandler, and Matt Chandler always says this. He's like, your parents did the best they could with the best they had at the time. And I say that about my parents because I was not raised in a picket fence house with it was very, very emotionally just abusive, right? Like it was so hard. My sister, she would go in and out of therapy. My dad would always bring me to like psychiatrist, therapist, whatever. And I just always knew what to say to kind of like get out of it. But as we were growing up in New York, my sister was gone. So I was separated from her, and it was just kind of like me doing my own thing. And I learned like, it was kind of like survival of the fittest. And so I was like, well, guess what? I am going to outdo every single human being. Now, mind you, this was not in a positive manner. It was always in a negative manner to where, at one point in my high school, they were like, you're going to end up in jail. Like you are most likely, you have superlatives and everyone's like, you're most likely to end up in jail. However, it was two teachers, but really one who, man, this guy believed in me. And his name, I'll never forget his name, John Soy. Guy was like He was half Irish, and the Irish definitely stuck out. Like red head, like nobody's business, red beard, red like afro, and he was our football coach. But he also taught like social studies, and I kind of like latched onto him because he was like he was like the man, right? Like he was a man's man, and like when we would do football, the stories of him cracking helmets in football was like that. I was just like, yeah, like I want to be like this guy, and so. He believed in me before I even believed in myself. And, like growing up, I'm like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. And I said, I want to join the Army. Like I want to join, actually, let me back up. I want to join the Marines. And I'll never forget when I was working at a job where a Marine came in and he was like, no, join the Army. So 9/11 happened and I knew that I was heading in the wrong place. Like, because I was failing art. Because I would skip school to go to work. Like I would not go to school because I would rather go to work. And my dad's response, because my dad was always working, and my dad's response was always like, kid's got a good work ethic, but he's just, I was always getting arrested. I was always like, literally the police were always just like, kid, when are you going to get it through your skull? Like you keep going. And I'm like, nah, you don't understand. Like I was just that kind of guy. And 9/11 happened, and I will never forget. Just that changed my life. And I joined, like, I was like, no, I'm joining the Army.
You were living in New York?
Yeah, I was living in New York. And, we're watching the towers, like the second plane hit on, the rolling TVs. That's how old I am, right? The rolling TVs. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like it was probably the first time I ever really felt scared. Like I have been beat up. I've had a lot of things happen to me, guns pulled on me, all these things. And that was the first time that I was like, wow, like, because you can't do anything. You're just like, oh my goodness, like I am so vulnerable. So I said, I'm going to join the Army. And it was really cool because at the time, there was American flags everywhere. Yep. Like it was, America was like, yo, don't do that to us. And my friends, I'll never forget, they were like, everybody was scared in my high school to join the military because everyone is always told like, go to college. And I knew that I just wasn't the smartest person. Like I'm not, because my whole life I had been told that like, you're not good enough. So I said, okay, well, you know what I can do? Like, well, you know what I am good at? Taking a bunch of like just punches. Like that's what I'm good at. It's just taking punches. Cause like I said, I was getting beat up at, when I was in middle school. So I joined the Army. And that was kind of like my idol because it's almost like I'd always been searching for a father figure, like a figure to look over me and be like, I am proud of you. And so I joined the Army and I learned real quick, like that. If you are in the right place, the right time, and you have motivation, you will go far. And immediately, like basic training, my drill sergeant's like, you're platoon guy or whatever. And like, I felt accepted. Like I felt these men, even though they were aggressive, who I looked up to because they were men, they still would like, and I'll never forget the one day I got fired. I was like, I was in tears. I was crying like, oh my goodness, I let him down. And so like, this is kind of like a reoccurring theme throughout my whole life of just looking for that male role model and always feeling like I let them down. So like kind of fast forward, my first deployment to Iraq was, and I wanted to go. Like after 9/11, I was like, send me. And not in the Isaiah 6:8 way, right? Like I was just like, no, send me.
Yeah.
And so, I went my first deployment, and that was a very eye-opening experience. Like it was so eye-opening because, I remember coming back home from New York and just looking at people and just being angry, like just being full of anger. Like you are all missing the point. You know what I'm saying? Like you're walking through villages where you have black water, like there are black waters right in the middle of this street. Like their canals are just covered in sewage and just human feces. And like these and there's these little kids and you're like, oh my goodness. You come home and you're like, this is crazy. So that kind of like really shifted my mental thinking on things where I kind of felt, I know towards the end of my first deployment, I kind of felt invincible. Because you kind of accept it where you're like, well, like if this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen. Now, I can't imagine the men who fought during World War II because that's on a whole nother level.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying like on the level where I was at. And so I really started, like, I kind of dabbled into, like I said, I like Christian hip hop. So I listened to secular hip hop. And at the time, there's DMX, and in DMX, he's got a lot of these prayers to Jesus. And it was really the first time I ever heard the name Jesus. And I was like, who is this guy Jesus? Like who is Jesus? Because my parents never raised us to go to church. And the only way, the reason I would go maybe to Catholic mass is because my father did it. Because, you know, my father was like, hey, we're Italians. Like, we go to church. This is what we do. And I'm like, I would not know what they were saying because he'd go to Latin service. So I'd be like, yep. Mm-hmm. So, but I did it because I wanted to be accepted by my dad. So this was the first time kind of I heard about Jesus. And so I come home and there's this like fallout between me and my dad, and you know, that fractures, and I'm like, I'm so lost. I am headed down the wrong road to where I turn to alcohol. I start turning to alcohol. I start drinking, really binge drinking. And, you know, I move to my next duty assignment and I meet my wife. And at my next duty assignment, I meet Rick. And, you know, Rick has his own story. However, Rick and I shared a lot of similarities.
So similar. And,
you know, because what Rick and I were always doing was looking for a woman, right? Like where's the next woman? Like, where are we gonna go? Because it was kind of like, I know for me, I can't speak for Rick, but for me, it was like, that's another. So if I couldn't get it from male's approval, I'd get it from a woman's approval.
Yeah.
Like I was always seeking that approval. So, and to be honest, like I was seeking approval from Rick because I like looked up to Rick because I'm like, okay, here's Rick. Because so Rick was a staff sergeant at the time and I was a sergeant. And so I'm like, I'm looking at him like, oh, he's cool, man. Like, here's this guy, right? And, you know, Rick was the guy who, man, he was like he rode bikes, he had triathlons. Like his dad was a triathlon guy, so Rick was a triathlon guy. Like Rick was very like just always like, nah, man, we'll do this. And I'm like, yeah, I'll follow Rick anywhere. And so
can't wait to do your podcast.
I met my wife on MySpace, and she came all the way over to where we were stationed at, and I'll never forget. The first day out, we go out to Lake Lanier on this pontoon boat. And, you know, to this day, I still have the pictures of Rick and myself. But, you know, I knew right then and there I was going to marry. And this is the first time I met my wife. Like, we had been talking on phone, through messaging, but, like, there was a storm coming. Do you remember this? Mm-hmm. Huge storm. Like, it just came out of nowhere. And if you're from Georgia, you know that, like, especially during the summertime, those isolated storms come quick. So we bring the pontoon boat in and we back up the trailer, and like there's me and my girlfriend at the time, like we're cranking, pulling the thing in, and I'm looking at her. I'm like, I could do this like for the rest of my life. She's like, that's what I'm talking about. Next thing you know, like a couple months later, we get married, and that's really where it just began to. God started to really. Like he exposed a lot of things. Like I'm getting goosebumps. He exposed a lot of things because my wife, she is from the South. So she was always raised that if you said a prayer, you were saved. And so my wife, when she was younger, again, she's got her story to tell, but when she was younger, she said a prayer. So she thought she was Christian. So now, mind you, this is my next, you know, iteration with Christianity. Like the first time is I'm hearing it through music, secular music, and then now I'm like dealing with it with my wife. And we, for the first 6 months of our marriage, it was so unhealthy. Like we were fighting. Rick probably remembers a lot of this stuff too, but we were fighting. My wife ended up losing custody of her son, her 5-year-old son, because of me. And that was big. Like, I mean, you're talking about within 6 months, my wife loses custody of her son because of me. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Oh, and on top of that, hey, you're going to PCS. We're going to move you. And this is my wife's first move. And so now you have her family telling her, hey, fight for your kids or you go with this guy. So she came with me. And once again, alcohol. And when I say alcohol, it started to really amp up. So we moved. And I deployed again, and during that deployment, super unhealthy with me and my wife arguing. And And I remember I would ask my wife questions about Christianity. Because I'm like, oh, you're a Christian. Like, what does this mean? Like, why does God say this? And she would always tell me, she's like, if you don't have the Holy Spirit in you, you won't understand the Bible. And I'm like, that's just dumb. And so like we would argue about Christianity a lot. And then, you know, we tried to have kids. My wife had we lost a child. And so, you know, that really hit hard for her. And for me, you know, loss was kind of like, that was like the thing that just happened in my life. So I was really just cold about it. And, you know, my wife, I love my wife. She has taken so much from my past. But fast forward, we move again. And I'm now in a special operations unit. And I am, you know, now there's things that are demanded of you. And I would be gone at like 4 a.m. and I wouldn't come home until probably about like 8 o'clock at night. And then if we were doing like a night jump, forget about it. I'm not home till like 2, 3 in the morning. And then a couple hours later, I'm gone. My wife worked. Then we had our first child together. And that was so much stress, but we never really saw each other. And I remember my wife would always be like, let's go to church. And I'm like, I'm not going to church. Like, who goes to church? Like, no. And that's where alcohol finally really just started. That's where it was kind of like the apex, because it went from me drinking just a little bit to where I started drinking almost a fifth a night. I mean, I remember like payday would come and I would go to the Class 6 and be like, okay, let me buy my month's worth of alcohol. And I'd walk out like with like all these fifths. And I would have people, I'd have people tell me like, you know, you have a drinking problem, right? Like that's alcoholism. I'm like, nah, I'm good. I can max my PT test. I can run faster than anybody. I can lift better than anybody. Like that's what I do. Now, mind you, in all of this, right, that I haven't kind of talked, is that I also love physical fitness. Like I love physical fitness. I'm kind of like addictive to pain. So, up to this point, I had already had 2 Guinness World Records, one for running a full marathon with a pro mask, and then one running a half marathon with a pro mask.
When you say pro mask?
Gas mask.
A gas mask.
Yeah.
So you're barely getting oxygen.
Yeah. Because when I was in Iraq, my second time, I had a buddy who was a runner, and I was like, dude, I'd love to run a marathon in a gas mask. There's 2 things I wanted to do. Run a marathon in a gas mask, and then do the death race, the Spartan death race. And I did both. And I accomplished both. And so, you know, I did all these things. Like, I was that guy who you could put me up. I was never afraid to go in the ring and get beat up. Because, again, my past. So I had so much pride in myself. Like I kept saying, you cannot destroy me. You cannot. I will go there. You will beat me up and I will get back up and I will do it again. Like that's who I am. And then it just came to a point where things started heating up overseas, and we got a phone call and they said, hey, we're sending some troops over there. And I was like, once again, not Isaiah 6:8, definitely not, but I was like, send me. And within 72 hours, I was gone. And that did not make my wife happy, because I didn't tell her, didn't confront her, like, you know, consult her with it. And I was just like, whatever, woman, like, I don't care. Like, I'm going, like, it's like, I was like an adrenaline junkie. Like, I thrived off of adrenaline. I still kind of do, but in a healthy way. And so when I'm overseas in this area, we have limited access kind of to the outside. And so when I did get access, I kind of shot my wife a message and said, hey, I just want to let you know, like, because all of a sudden, like, I had this weight, and I was like, man, I have a really good wife. So I messaged her. I was like, hey, I'm just letting you know I love you and I appreciate everything you do. And within a matter of an hour, my wife messaged back and said, well, I don't really think that. I'm on a divorce. And I was like, I went and found one of my guys. We used to call him MacGyver, because that guy, you could be in the middle of nowhere in this world, and he would somehow find a satellite to connect to, and you can get a like he would just use a paper clip or something and attach it to, like, you know, the hammer, and all of a sudden you're talking. And I remember calling my wife, and she was like, I am done. I want a divorce. And I just tears, like, because once again, I felt vulnerable. Like I couldn't fight my way out of this. I couldn't take this punch and be like, okay, I can get back up. Like, again, my wife loved me. And I always desired to have someone love me. And I just remember crying and crying and crying. And I was like, I got to go home. I got to go home. And the sergeant major on ground, the officer on ground was like, do you know how many other men I have here who have marital problems? Like, do you know what's going on, what we're about to do? Like, you're not going home. And I'll never forget, the sergeant major put his arm around me, walked me off the side and said, I don't care what he just said. You go home and you save your marriage. Your marriage is way more important than anything. And I looked at him and he said, trust me. So I got on a plane. 50 million planes later, I get home and I beg for forgiveness from my wife, and she's like, no. And so that initiated, like, we're like, oh my goodness, like, I'm getting a divorce. And, again, alcohol just really amping that up. And I went to work. And the first place I went to is what we're trained to do. I went to behavioral health. And now where I was at, you had two doors. You had a behavioral health door and you had a chaplain door. So I went into behavioral health. And at the time, so I come home and I'm still living in the same house with my wife, sleeping in the same bed. And I tell this to the behavioral health lady. She's like, you need to get out of there. Like, you need to get out of there and just go through with the divorce. I was like, lady, I don't think you hear what I'm saying. Like, I want to save my marriage. She's like, no, you're not going to save it. Like, we need to focus on you. I was like, no. I need to focus on my wife. Like, how do I? No, it's about you. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to talk to you. So I go over and I knock on the chaplain's door. Chaplain's not there. So I go to my office, and about maybe 3 hours later, all of a sudden the chaplain comes into my office. And I'm thinking to myself, this dude never, ever comes to my office. I hate chaplains. He knows I don't like chaplains. Why is he here? And he sits down and he says, yeah, something told me to just come see you today. And I'm like, whatever, man. I was like, someone must have saw me in the hallway, but there was nobody in the hallway. And he's just like, I just want to checking in, just seeing how you're doing. And something inside of me, which I know what it is now, but something inside of me was like and I just word vomit to this guy. And I told him everything. I started crying and just telling him everything. And this chaplain looks at me and he says, before I say anything to you, would you watch a movie? I'm like, chaplain, I just told you, like, would you watch a movie? And then we'll talk. And I said, fine, chaplain. What movie do I got to watch? He says, I want you to watch this movie called Fireproof.
Knew it.
And so I said, okay, cool. So I go home that night and I go through whatever it was that we were streaming. And I go and I look and I'm like, Fireproof. And I'm watching this. And the moment, the very first scene, I just start bawling crying. Like, I'm going to cry right now. Because I was like, that's me. Like, I self-identified so quick with Kirk Cameron in that. Like, I was like, oh my goodness, like, this is me. And then throughout the whole movie, I'm like crying. Halfway in, my wife comes walking through the living room. She's like, what are you watching? And I was like, Fireproof. And she's like, she points to our DVD stand thing. And she's like, we've owned it for like 3 years. And I'm like, what do I say? So I get done watching this movie. I go back to work the next day. And I'm like, man, there's something weird. Like, I feel like I'm missing something. And now I'm still sad, but I'm like, man, I'm really missing something. Like, I don't know. And the chaplain comes and sees me. He's like, hey, what'd you think? I'm like, yeah, it was good, this and that. And he's like, watch it again. I was like, chaplain, what are you talking about? Like, watch a movie twice? I haven't watched a movie twice since I was a little kid. Like, come on. So he's like, watch it again. So I watch it again. And there is a scene where Kirk Cameron is with his dad, and they are at this, like, camp, and there's a cross. And I'll never forget this. Like, Kirk Cameron's like, Dad, like, I do all these things for my wife. How could someone ever show they love someone so much? Like, I don't understand. Like, I'm doing all these things, but like, how could someone ever show? And there's his dad. He turns over and he looks up at the cross. At that moment, I started crying. I was like, oh my goodness, like, that's it. Like, that's it. It's Jesus. Oh, whoops. I was like, it's Jesus. And so the next day, I get on my road bike and I go out riding. And at Fort Campbell, you kind of have like this training area, and that's where I would go out and ride. And I remember riding out there, and all I kept thinking about was this. And then at just one point, I was told to like just stop. Like in my mind, I'm like, okay, just stop right here. I got off my bike. And I just fell to my knees, and I was crying. Oh my goodness! So this is July 30th of 2014, and I'm crying, and I'm like, Jesus, I can't do this. I can't do this anymore. Like, there was no like confessing with my mouth that like, no, it was just me and God having a talk. Like me and Jesus. Like I was like, Jesus, I cannot do this anymore. I need you. Like I need you. Like I can't do this. Like I am a terrible human being. I'm a dirtbag. I don't even deserve to live. Jesus, I need you. And it was like at that moment, it was like a weight just lifted off my shoulders. I got back on my bike, and now I'm smiling. Like I'm smiling all the way in. That day, we went to go sign the divorce papers. Me and my wife, she's sitting in the car seat. We go to the lawyer's office, which the lawyer had said multiple times. She's like, you guys do not need a divorce. You need actual therapy. Like, that's what you need. I'm like, no, my wife wants divorce. So we go in, we sign the papers, both, her and I. We get back in the truck, and I look at my wife. Now, there's a couple things that I always told my wife I never wanted. I never wanted another kid, and I never wanted to go back to being stationed in Hawaii. And she's like, I looked at her, and I said, hey, I got to tell you something. She's like, what? I said, first off, I want you to know that I want another kid. Second, I want to go to Hawaii. I said, but third, the most important, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. I will never, my wife just started punching me in the arms. I hate you. I hate you. I hate you. Like, why now? And I kept telling her, I was like, I didn't want to tell you before because I didn't want you thinking I was manipulating you. I wanted to tell you after we signed. So that, and she was just like, and then, man, like that is when like God started working on her because so she moves out and I move her out. Like I'm literally the guy who's her moving company. I move her out into an apartment, and we're on a jump one day, and we're getting suited up, and the chaplain comes up to me and he says, hey, I'm just letting you know, God's telling me something. Something doesn't seem right. And I was like, Chaplain, what are you talking about? And he's like, there's still more to tell. And I'm like, Chaplain, what are you talking about? Sure enough, she texts me. I'm telling you, I can't make this stuff up. Like, and this is why when everyone tells me like the God doesn't, I'm like, okay, whatever, dude. Like I've seen it. So I get a text message, and it's my wife says, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. She's like, we'll meet you at the house at the, later on today. And so she comes back to the house because I'm still living in the house. She's living in an apartment. And she sits down and she says, while we've been going through this divorce, I met another guy, and I haven't been faithful to you. I looked at her and smiled. I was like, if Jesus can forgive me for all that I have done to you and everybody else in this world, honey, I forgive you. And my wife, when she tells her story, she's like, I literally was like, what did he just say to me? Like, this is Mark. Like, this is the guy who is like enraged in anger. And so she's like, I don't think you heard me. Let me say it again. So she says it again. I'm like, yeah, no, I heard you. Like, I forgive you. That's super easy. Like, Jesus forgave me. And this went on for like 20, 30 minutes. And she broke down crying. Like, she could not believe it. And I told her, I was like, okay, like now that we've done this, like, let's make this work. And she's like, no, I don't think you understand. I still want a divorce. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, okay. So now I started going to church, and I wasn't going to, I was doing the best I could with the best I had. Mm-hmm. So I went to this local church, and there was a group of men, right? They had kind of like a men's whatever group. And it was, again, the men were doing the best they could with the best they had. And they would encourage me throughout all this. And I'm like, I don't get it. But one of the guys said, hey, listen, man, like, your wife is still with this guy. And like, this is going to continue to eat you alive. And I was like, okay. So I told my wife would keep stuff at the house, and I was like, no, I can't do this. So I took all her stuff and I brought it to her apartment. I was like, I can't do this. Like, I can't. The only connection I have with you is my son. Like, that's the only thing I can have is my son. And she started like, no, that's not fair. I was like, no, like, well, you're with this other guy. Like, I cannot do this with you. Like, emotionally, I cannot do this. And we argued, screamed, yelled, and she was just crying, and I just separated. And I'll never forget one of the pastors, because I wanted to make this work. I love my wife, and she loved me. And so one of the pastors was like, hey, Matthew states that because your wife was unfaithful, like, you're okay to get a divorce. And I was like, bro, you're missing the point, man. Like, there's no way Jesus would want, like, why would Jesus do this to me and be like, you need to really get a divorce? Like, no, Jesus just saved me. Like, no, like, I need to do this. And so I kind of like deuced out to that church because I was like, no, this isn't healthy. And so, I'm back on my own, and my wife, she'll tell in her story that, she was contemplating suicide. And the night she was contemplating suicide, she fell to her knees and just asked God for forgiveness. And up to that, point, I kept always telling her, hey, let's go to church. Let's go to church. And she's like, no, I'm not going to church. Like, not yet. Like, I'm not ready. Because people have the misconception that Christians have to clean themselves up to go to church. And she fell to her knees. She repented. And the next morning, I get a text message. It's Sunday morning. I'm going to church, and I'm getting baptized that day. Like, that afternoon, I'm getting baptized. And my wife texts me, and she's like, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, I remember looking up at me and like, God, like, I don't know how much more I can take. Like, I don't know. And she's like, I need you to pray for me. And I'm like, okay, but what am I praying for? She's like, God knows. So I was like, okay. She's like, I need you to come by the apartment around 1 o'clock. So I was like, okay. I said, why 1? She said, because it's when I get out of church. So I was like, why is she going to church? So I go to church that day, and I'm over here. I don't even remember the sermon. I don't remember anything, because all I'm thinking about is like, what is about to happen? So I show up to my wife's apartment, and she is like smiling like nobody's business. And I'm like, she's like, why do you look so poopy faced? And I'm like, what is going on? She says, check your phone. So I check my phone. I see this screenshot of a text message thread with her and this guy, and says, hey, I can't talk to you. I don't ever want to speak to you again. Like, I can't do this if I want to make my marriage work. And I want to make my marriage work. And so have a nice life. And I looked at her, and she's like, I want to make this. I'll never forget. She broke down crying. She's like, I want to make this work. And I was like, oh my goodness, praise Jesus. And that day, here I am getting baptized, and I'm bringing my wife to this baptism. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, God, look what you just did. Like, people will not understand. And I can tell you that, because my wife gets saved, our marriage was not great. In that there was a transition, right? Like, it wasn't this amazing thing. There was still arguments in the beginning, because we're trying to navigate, what does God say a marriage looks like, until we started going to church. That's why it's so important to, 1, go to church, but 2, read this. And so we started going, and where my wife and I are at, we're of course 10 years ahead of this, but we stopped drinking alcohol. We dumped it down the drain, and we had some serious spiritual warfare. But we have been alcohol-free since October 14th of 2014. And then, so this is 2014, like, all this just happened. My daughter, my daughter gets born. My daughter, EJ, who, she loves Rick. My daughter's born, and she's born 2 years later on the day that I was saved. So it's like, every time I look at my daughter, I'm reminded of like what God saved me from. And I can tell you, like, in my work, even my personality shifted to where I started getting a lot of hate, because people were just like, who is this? Like, you are not the ravaging pit bull you used to be. Like, who are you? And so, like, I had this kind of, I don't know what a Christian man looks like. And over time, I've learned, I have been discipled by true discipleship by really good Christian men. But I've also sought the answers for myself and not just looked at culture. Because sometimes when you look at culture, like, again, you're fitting in this box. Because sometimes people think going to church, you have to wear a suit and tie and dress like that. And that's the only way you do it. And you have to be clean shaven, right? Like clean shaven, haircut, all these things. And I'm like, that's just not who I am. Like, I've never been like this. Why can't I be me? Until like I started seeing, because of men exposing these things to me, of like, God's not trying to tell, God's telling you like, hey, what's a sin, right? Like, hey, this is, but God's not saying like, you have to dress, that you have to do this. And, oh, by the way, I have a tattoo, and people were like, oh, you can't have tattoo, Leviticus 19 and this. And I'm like, but I learned through apologetics how to defend myself. Like, hold on a second. Right. That's not right. But since then it was, like I still do. I run multiple marathons. I do multiple fitness events where, Rick's always like, hey, come to Men's Alliance. And I'm like, dude, I got a 20-mile run that day, like in that morning. Cause I'll usually run 13, 20, whatever miles on my Saturdays. But like I changed, like I am a new man in Christ. However, like God didn't just tell me to stop being who I was. Mm-hmm. Like God didn't say, okay, hey, I need you out of the army.
Right.
If it's anything, it propelled me even more, because then I started getting promoted. And it's not like God gave me promotion because I was so obedient. No, God gave me a promotion because he knew what I had to do, which was, okay, now that I've had you been discipled for this many years, now I'm going to go make you a first sergeant. I'm going to put you in charge of human beings. And I'm thinking to myself, like, when I got promoted, my wife and I, she'll tell you, I was like, I know what I need to do. Like, I know exactly what I need to do. And people are like, how do you know? And I'm like, this is what I'm going to go do. And to be a light for Jesus in a world where, people have this misconception. Mm-hmm. And then now, as a sergeant major, I'm getting ready to go to, to the 82nd Airborne Division, America's, Guards of Freedom. They're the ones they call for 911 when something happens. And, you're talking about, there's a lot, it's hard, a lot of training, a lot of pride, a lot of ego, a lot of, we're the best, and I'm okay with having that at sometimes. Mm-hmm. We've had this discussion at church, about aggression. And I'm like, sometimes I think aggression is good because, in the military, we need to be aggressive on some things that we do. But
God is a warrior.
Oh,
right.
Listen,
the Lord is his name.
Joshua was not the guy who was like, hey guys, let's go ahead and do this. Like, no. So if anyone knows anything about be strong and courageous, mm-hmm. That was actually a war cry, a battle cry then. They used to, it was Rock Kazaka Mats. Like, they would be like, Rock Kazaka Mats. And it was a war cry moving forward. And it's just like, again, I'm not saying we go out and like murder people, but I'm just saying, like, we have to defend. And so that's why, like, where I'm at now, I enjoy defending my faith, mm-hmm. Because I think there's that level of understanding. Like, when people look at me, I don't go around and tell people like, hey, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Because I take scripture very, very serious, to where I'm like, I know that I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. There's things that I do in my life that are not right. And that's where I have my prayer time, and I'm, repenting, and I am turning to God. But I think sometimes building those relationships with people, because again, we're human nature. Like, you can't just, Jesus didn't say, like, when they're like, hey, where are you staying? And Jesus didn't be like, come see me on Saturday morning at, whatever time and listen to my sermon. No, Jesus was like, come, follow me. And I think that's what we have to remember as men, that, it's not going to just happen in an instant. Apologetics is great. Like you said, it's with the family. But really what opens the door to the non-Christian out there as an adult is building that relationship and letting them, if you want them to put their guard down so that you can have conversations, mm-hmm. you have to be relatable. Mm-hmm. There is someone who I follow, and he's like, you have to be real, you have to be relatable, you have to be righteous, like all of these things in order, because if you're not real, like, authentic, which you guys are, right? Like you guys are authentic human beings. Like you know that this is who you are. Who you are here on this podcast is who you are at your house,
Right.
is who you are with people. Like that's who you are. And then you're righteous. You know that you're righteous through Jesus Christ, not through any works of your own. And which brings that humility piece. And then you're relatable because you have men who look at you and they're like, okay, this dude does some mixed martial arts. Like, all right, like that's pretty cool, man. Like, and then I love the hammers. I love the hammers and the axes because it's like, okay, it's not, you guys don't have little feathers and like you have like, hey man, should men be pounding steel? Yeah, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another, right? Like, should we be chopping down trees? Yeah, we should be. Like, this is what we're designed to do. And so like my story, I mean, it's great because God gets the glory every time. And when people hear it, like when I saw Rick the first time when we were at Bragg and we went out to lunch, I was just like, yo, and Rick will tell you, like, I don't know like what he thought of me, but I just remember I was just like, I'm not the same person, right? Like I'm not, this is not who I am. And then seeing Rick again here was super encouraging. I'm like, okay, God, like this isn't just one time. This is 2 times we've crossed paths. And it is so cool to see how God works in Rick's life where, a lot of people, they know Rick, who Rick is now. But me going back to like 2008, 2007, and being like, oh, I know who Rick was and Rick knows who I was. And knowing that both of us now truly are unashamed, but at the same time know that, like, hey, we don't need to glorify our past of being like, this is what we went through, but we also need to be like, this is what we went through. Because God tells us to remember, that's the whole point of the Passover meal, was to remember what he rescued us from. And for me, every year, around my salvation time and my baptism time, because my wife accepted Christ, the day before that I was baptized. So like, there's this period in my household that we are so full of emotions, but we do it every year because it's a reminder to us. And over the years, we finally started kind of like, again, being more transparent. Like when people see on my social media, like I literally will take a picture of the divorce decree and they're like, what? Like I'm like, yeah, man, like this, I'm not lying to you. And it causes questions for the non-believer of my friends. Like, hey, like what made you change? And even, as times as a leader, I've had soldiers, I have seen some crazy stuff with soldiers where they're behavioral health and they're just like, what made you change? And I'm like, you want to know me? Like, I'm going to tell you about me. I'm just telling you what worked, what happened for me. And I tell them. And, sometimes they'll be like, hey, I don't believe it. I'm like, okay, that's cool, right? Like, and that's where it ends. But then some, they'll ask a question and I'll be like, okay, hey, here you go. The chaplain has always said to me, one of my buddies is a chaplain. He said, listen, soldiers will listen to you more than listen to me. Because the moment they know that I'm a chaplain, they automatically have a preconceived notion. But they see you, they know like they're getting the real person. They're not getting some Bible, even though that's not how he was just saying like, you're getting the raw person. And then when you're like, yeah, this is what I do. I follow Jesus. And now God has literally emboldened me to the point where, now being a sergeant major, I tell people, I'm like, I'm not afraid. Like I feel like, I tell this to my wife. I was like, I feel like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone. Like I keep telling myself, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid anymore. Because I just feel this, like, I'm not afraid. And so having that conversation a couple weeks ago, in that setting, it was really cool. Cause I was like, okay, well, I accepted my faith. Like if this is what ruins my career of having an actual lot, like I wasn't degrading anybody. I was just having a discussion. When you asked me my opinion and I gave it, and apologetics, Ravi Zacharias once said this, actually said it a lot. He used to say, truth by definition is offensive. It will always offend someone. Truth, if you have two people who are like, truth doesn't offend them, then it's not truth at all. Relativism it's absolute truth. And so for me, it's like when you have conversations and you're speaking the truth, man, you're going to have a lot of people upset. And I think, again, God equipped me. When I look back on my life, the punches I took, the fights I was in, the arguments I've been in, like, this is where God prepared me for it. And I think for every man, you know, I encourage them to look back and just look back and be like, hey, what did I go through in my life? Because there are men who I have come in contact with that are really good at just critical thinking skills. They know how to critically think. Okay, well then, why don't you use that when it comes to Christian apologetics? Right. Or you have men who are really like, hey, I'm really creative. Like woodworking. Oh my goodness. I see men who do woodworking. I'm like, see, this is how I know you have Jesus in you, because you can do, but woodworking to me is one of those, that's a creative thing. That's not what brings me joy, but to some men it does. Again, if you are creative in your woodworking, you can be creative in your conversations. So kind of like that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Dude, that's incredible.
Sorry, it was like really long.
Yeah, I think an important thing there that you were ending on is however God made you is how he wants to use you, right? If there are men who have, you know, the gift of public speaking. There's men who have musical abilities, you know, and your gift is a warrior, right? God doesn't want you to stop being a warrior. If you're in the military and you become a Christian, God doesn't want you to stop being a warrior. That's how he made you. He now wants you to be a warrior for him. And so I think people think, if I become a Christian, if I follow Jesus, I'm going to have to change. You're actually not going to. You're only going to change the bad parts. You're actually going to accelerate at the parts that you were designed for, that you have those passions and gifts for. And so I think that's an important part of it, is like, man, you can be a warrior for Christ.
Yeah.
Whatever it is you do, you know, do it heartily for the Lord. And so, man, guys, we got to hear from an American warrior and a man who has been changed by Jesus, right? Simply put, this is just the story of a man whose life has been changed when he gave it to Jesus, and a marriage.
Yeah.
Right. So cool hearing how God was also working on her, and you guys, it kind of like all culminated there. You guys came together on the day you got baptized.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
Like I said, I there's so many stories, you know, that I have of especially like spiritual warfare. Like, I am a very big, again, coming from New York, I remember the first time I brought my wife to New York City, and she's like, oh my goodness, it's this purse that is only $5, but and I'm like, honey, that's a fake, right? Like, that's a fake. And so for me, I'm very skeptical on when I hear things. And so I think that's where, again, God gives us these abilities and these gifts for me, I'm just I get skeptical. So I want to know how some things work. And sometimes, though, as Christians, we fear things outside of the Bible. I read a lot of books on psychology. I like to read a lot of books on doing hard things, because I have an addiction. I have this saying, people who know me as a leader in the Army, you know, like, we're going to do hard things. Like, we're going to build grit. Like, that's what we're going to do. Like, it's going to suck. Sorry for saying that, but it's going to suck. Like, It's going to be terrible. And we're going to do this together, though. Like, that's what's cool about it. And as a Christian, we have to remember that it is not always going to be perfect. And as men out there, if it's anyone I can encourage, it's the men of saying, like, hey, look in the Bible and pick a man in the Bible and just study that man. You know, study any man. You can study Elijah, Elisha, King David. I mean, King David was not just given the throne like that. Like, it was rough. So the one thing, though, that King David was always having, if you notice that he had with him, is his little tribe. And so for men out there who don't have a tribe, whether it's Men's Alliance or there's a lot of other things out there, but I really think men need to look at, like, hey, where's my tribe? Like, where am I at? Because you cannot go out in this world and fight the battle that is not against flesh and blood without being surrounded by men who are like, let's do this. Like, I'm going to pray for you. I am going to pray so hard for you, because you know what? As a man, that just sounds like, I don't know if I want to do it, but I promise you, like, I have seen just from Men's Alliance in my church that I attend, seeing like the men, like the confidence in these men. And it's not like arrogance, like straight just confidence in Jesus, like not afraid to be like, you know what, put their hand up and praise Jesus. Or, you know what, I'm going to go to church. I'm going to wear my Men's Alliance sweatshirt. I don't care what anyone thinks. Like there's that strength in their faith. So I really say thank you guys for what you guys are doing for the Christian community and for the men out there. So yeah.
Powerful, bro. Closing thoughts, man?
Man, I know what shadow feels like over here now. No, brother, I am so glad that you came on, man, and shared your story. You being that leader you are in the military, and still standing firm on your faith, not being ashamed to share and to stand up and be the warrior for Christ that you are, just like you are the warrior for America. Brother, I love you, and man, I'm so glad that you were came on the podcast to share, because this is a story I know is going to affect a lot of men.
Oh, I hope so. Now, I do have a question, though.
Absolutely.
Is there any way I can pray for you guys?
Do it.
How can I pray for you?
Man, you can pray for me for wisdom,
Okay.
for strength and courage,
Okay.
and pray for my family.
Okay.
So I got four kids and wife right there of 24 years.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah. So
That's really cool. Like
could use prayer for the Mills family.
that's awesome that you guys
Yeah.
do this together. Like that's wow. Like you didn't even tell me that I'm going through the whole thing, and like I'm that's really cool that you guys do this, because so yeah, I'm thankful that God put you in his life, because the fact that you are encouraging this and that you are supporting this, and like that is a very large thing that we are missing in today's culture, right? Like you are doing something that is counterculture, and you are doing a radical faith, because oh my goodness, like I'm sorry, because knowing this, I know now that like when God talks about it and says, hey, listen, the woman, like, hey, you gotta trust in your husband, like what you're doing right now, and trusting in him and what he does, and being like, I'm sure you're a sounding board for him at times, but
All the time.
the fact that you are just so supportive of it, that is what helps us as men continue to progress in Christ. Because I could not be where I am at without the support of my wife. And it's not just like, oh, hey, honey, I support you. And so like, thank you. Like, I don't know if anyone has personally thanked you, but I want to personally thank you for what you do, because by you doing what you're doing with him, you're helping other men. And that's incredible. So I really hope that other women, like, I don't know if you've interviewed her before on here.
I've tried,
but I honestly, I think it would be good, because I think it would be good, because that's where men can be like, hey, honey, watch this episode.
See?
Because I commend you for what you're doing, because that's what you're doing is not easy. Like that's all like super smart stuff.
Men's Alliance is a family ministry.
Yeah, that is
all
awesome.
of every man involved in leading in Men's Alliance, our wives are all a part of that ministry. We can't do this without them.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm sorry, Rick.
And
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kerry Mills.
So how can I pray for you?
Brother, I would say boldness.
Yeah.
And just boldness to share.
Yeah.
Anywhere, at the gas pump, wherever it is, and pray for those opportunities that they come, and when they do come, that I have the boldness to stand up. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. So can I close this?
Let's do it.
All right. Lord Jesus, thank you so much for this opportunity that I have been able to have. Lord, I'm so thankful that you are allowing me to do this and putting me in a position to be able to tell my story about what you have done in my life and where you are still kind of pushing us and guiding us. And I'm so thankful for that. Jesus, I do pray for the men out there who are struggling right now, who don't want to admit it, but they know deep down inside that they're struggling. They're looking for and searching for that group of men. Lord, I pray that Men's Alliance would just be at that point of need. And I pray for these men to also not fear to seek out Men's Alliance. I'm sure there's been people who have been watching this for months, years, who have not been a part of a tribe. And I do pray for those men that they would take that step and actually be a part of a tribe. Lord, I also pray for the men out there as well who are suffering with any addiction. Lord, I pray for them that you would give them the strength and the courage to just say no, and then Holy Spirit, do the rest. Lord, I pray for the Mills family. I pray for wisdom. Just pour it out, Lord. Pour it all out over the Mills family. I also pray, Lord, for their ministry that they are doing. Give them nothing but blessing after blessing for this ministry. But also, Lord, give them that hope and show them, Lord, how much they are really impacting them. In those moments where they may not feel like they're impacting enough people, Lord, just let them know that you see them and that you love them. And Lord, I pray for the Wells family. I pray, Lord, for boldness to just give them all the ability to just be unashamed and give them comfort in those moments where they are scared. Let them have the words, let them have just the response, but most of all, Lord, I pray let them have the heart. I thank you, Jesus, for this time that we've had, and I praise you, and no matter what happens in the rest of this day, Lord, may you get all the glory and all the honor. For it's in your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
To find out more about what we're doing and to join us on our mission, go to men'salliancetribe.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a 5-star review.